They left me standing in the dust, no shoes on my feet, no name worth keeping. My father handed the man $30 and a bottle of whiskey, then turned his back like I was nothing but a sack of grain. The stranger never touched me. Not once. He just said, "You are safe now," and tied my satchel to his saddle. I did not believe him. Men like that, quiet, kind-eyed, they never stayed kind. Not for long. But something in me, barely breathing, wanted him to be telling the truth. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Comment below. They named me Clara Mae Holloway, but names in my family never meant much. My mother only used mine when she was tired of screaming, and my father, well, he only ever called me girl. On our little patch of land near the edge of Missouri, I learned early that being born did not mean being wanted. We were not poor, not exactly. But the house was empty of more than furniture. No softness. No music. No love. The walls held in silence and sharp words. My mother wore her sorrow like a second dress, and my father carried disappointment in every step. I do not think they ever forgave me for being a girl. When I was 8, I burned my hand trying to make cornbread. My mother slapped me for wasting flour. When I was 10, I killed a snake with a broom to protect my baby brother. My father still whipped me for letting the door swing open. By 12, I stopped hoping for praise. I just wanted quiet. By 14, I had figured out that my presence was a burden. My mama would say things like, "If not for you, I might have gone to Kansas City." And my father would mutter, "Useless mouth to feed." I learned to disappear in corners, to carry buckets without splashing, and to cry without making a sound. At 15, I bled for the first time and locked myself in the barn. I thought something was wrong with me. When Mama found out, she only rolled her eyes and said, "Well, now you are another kind of problem." That winter, everything froze, our crops, our animals, and whatever was left of my parents' marriage. I overheard them one night. My father said, "We need to sell the mule or the girl." My mother lit her pipe and replied, "The mule works harder." 2 weeks later, a man came riding down the dirt road. He wore a brown duster, boots caked in travel, and eyes that never lifted from the ground. I did not know his name. I did not even know he was there for me. Until he handed my father a bottle and a small pouch that jingled. $30, my father said. "She ain't good for much but cooking and keeping quiet." They shook hands. Just like that. Mama did not hug me. She pressed a cracked comb into my hand and said, "Try not to embarrass yourself." Then she turned back to the fire like she had just tossed out trash. I climbed into the back of that man's wagon with my satchel and a lump in my throat the size of heaven. The sun was setting, and the sky turned blood red behind me. I did not cry. Not then. Not when the wagon rolled out. Not even when I saw our house shrink into a dot, and my whole life turned to dust behind me. We traveled west for what felt like days. He did not speak much. Just offered me a blanket at night and gave me space to sleep. When I asked what he wanted from me, he only said, "Nothing. Just keep warm." I thought it was a trick. I had heard stories. Men who bought girls did not buy them for kindness. He told me his name was Wyatt Walker. Said he lived alone on a ranch near the Montana Territory. Said he used to fight in the war but was tired of fighting now. I watched him from the corner of my eye, waiting for cruelty to show itself. But Wyatt never raised his voice. Never touched my arm. Never made me feel small. Still, I did not trust him. Not yet. I had learned not to trust soft-spoken men. The first time we reached his homestead, I stared at the house like it might disappear. It was quiet. No shouts. No smoke. No smell of liquor. Just pine trees, a crooked barn, and the sound of wind whistling through the eaves. He said I could sleep in the loft until I felt safe. He gave me food, fresh clothes, and a pair of boots that nearly fit. I remember watching him chop wood that first evening. Strong arms, quiet eyes. He did not look at me like a purchase. He looked at me like I was something that needed protecting. But I did not believe in protectors anymore. Not after the life I had known. I tried to run the second week. Took some bread, a tin of matches, and my satchel. I made it as far as the creek before my ankle gave out. Wyatt found me under a tree, trying to build a fire with shaking hands. He did not scold me. He just said, "The world out there is meaner than me, Clara Mae." I stared at him and asked, "Why did you buy me?" He looked away, his jaw tight. "Because I heard what your father said. And I could not leave you there." That was the first time I cried. Real, broken sobs that came from someplace deep, older than my years. I cried because I had been sold. I cried because I had been rescued. And I cried because I did not know which hurt more. That night, he left a small wooden box by my door. Inside was a silver hairbrush and a folded note. It read, "You are not a burden. You are not a debt. You are a girl worth saving." I stared at those words until morning. And for the first time since childhood, I let myself believe they might be true. Life on the ranch was quiet, but not easy. I woke before the sun and worked past dark, my hands blistered and my back sore. There was always something to tend, chickens to feed, laundry to boil, fences to mend. Wyatt never asked it of me, but I did it anyway. I needed the work. It kept my thoughts from dragging me under. Still, I felt like a ghost in that house. A visitor, not a daughter. Not a wife. Not anything that belonged. At night, I would lie awake in the hayloft, listening to the owls and the rustling of wind against the boards. Sometimes I would imagine what it might feel like to laugh freely, or to be held without fear. But those were dangerous dreams. They made you soft. And softness, I had learned, got you hurt. The people in town were not cruel outright, but they knew. Word spread fast on prairie wind. At the general store, a woman glanced at me and whispered to her friend, "That's the girl he paid for." I pretended not to hear, but the shame burned deep. One man, red-faced and sour-smelling, offered Wyatt $5 to borrow me for a night. Wyatt's fists left that man bloody and limping. He did not speak a word afterward, just rode us home in silence, his jaw clenched so tight I thought it might crack. That night, I asked, "Why do you protect me?" He answered without looking up, "Because nobody else did." Still, I did not understand what I was to him. Not a wife. Not a child. I was something in between, a shadow in his house, a sorrow he had taken in like a stray dog. One morning, I found a handkerchief of mine folded neatly on the table. It had been torn days ago while I was feeding the goats. Now it was stitched back together, the seams tight and careful. Wyatt never said a word, but I knew it was him. Another day, I dropped a glass at breakfast. It shattered loud as thunder. I braced for shouting, for a slap, for something sharp. But Wyatt only said, "Careful now," and helped sweep up the pieces. My hands trembled for hours afterward. He started reading aloud sometimes in the evenings. Old trail journals, poems, Bible verses. I would sit near the stove, pretending not to listen, but each word nestled into me like a lullaby I had forgotten. I never told him how much I needed those sounds. But even as warmth crept into the edges of my life, I stayed guarded. Every kindness felt like a trap. Every smile, a trick waiting to snap shut. One afternoon, I found myself humming while hanging laundry, an old hymn my mother used to sing before life soured her. I stopped mid-note, horrified at myself. I was not supposed to feel joy. Not here. Not yet. Wyatt came out of the barn and said, "You got a pretty voice." I stared at him, breath caught. I wanted to believe he meant it, but the voice in my head hissed, "You are nothing. You are bought. You are shame." That night, I washed my hands twice as long, scrubbing until my skin went red. I had to remember who I was. I could not let softness undo me. Days turned to weeks, and the chores kept me moving. I patched torn shirts, hauled buckets, and shoveled manure like a penance. I avoided town as much as possible. I hated the stares. The whispers. The pity. One day, I passed by a mirror in the hallway and barely recognized the girl staring back. Her hair was longer now, her face a little fuller. But her eyes were still afraid. Still waiting to be hurt. I tried to leave again. I packed my satchel, stole a can of beans, and crept out just before dawn. I had not gone far when I heard hoofbeats behind me. Wyatt rode up slow, no anger in his face. "Going somewhere?" "I do not belong here," I said, eyes low. He dismounted, walked over, and handed me a canteen. "Then we will wait until you do." I stared at him. I had no answer for that. So I walked back beside him, my heart heavy but strangely warm. Later, I overheard him telling the mule, "That girl is like a wild colt, won't be broken by a bit, but maybe by kindness." I almost smiled. Almost. It happened on a Wednesday. Clear skies, calm air, nothing to warn what was coming. I had just come in from gathering eggs when Wyatt called from the porch. "Got something for you," he said, holding out a cloth-wrapped bundle. I hesitated. Gifts made me nervous. They came with strings or expectations, or guilt. But he only said, "It ain't much. Found it in the trunk my ma left behind." I unwrapped it slow. Inside was a book. Worn cover, frayed corners. The Psalms. "My ma used to read to me," he said. "Said even the worst days got softer if you gave to the Lord." I traced the faded letters, heart pounding. "Thank you," I said, not sure if I meant for the book or for something deeper. That night, I opened it while supper cooked. Read a few lines under my breath. They tasted strange in my mouth, like a language I used to know but had forgotten. Wyatt sat down at the table. "You ever read out loud?" I looked up sharp. "No. Would you?" My voice was shaking, but I nodded. "Just a few verses." My hands trembled as I turned the page, but I read anyway. When I looked up, he was watching me, not like a man watching a girl, but like a man watching sunrise after a long storm. The next day, I found a wooden chair fixed. One of the legs had cracked weeks ago. Now it sat straight and steady. No word from him. Just done. On the third day, he asked me to ride into town with him for supplies. I nearly said no. But something in me wanted to see how he moved in the world. The general store was quiet. A few folks nodded to Wyatt. They barely looked at me. I thought maybe things were changing. Then I heard it. She must be good for something, or he would not have kept her this long. A man snorted behind the barrel of molasses, chewing a toothpick. Heard he paid for her straight out. $30 for a wife he don't touch? Fool's charity, if you ask me. My chest tightened. The room spun. I grabbed the flour sack and turned to leave. Outside, I waited by the wagon, eyes hot, hands clenched. Wyatt came out a few minutes later. "You all right?" "No," I whispered. He did not push. Just loaded the wagon and said, "Let's get home." Back at the ranch, I stayed quiet. But the air between us grew heavy. I knew he heard them. I needed to know why he did not defend me. As we washed dishes, I blurted, "Do you regret buying me?" He stopped, hands dripping, eyes locked on mine. "I did not buy you," he said slowly. I bought your freedom. Same thing. No, he said firmly. Not the same. I saw a girl who was being thrown away like a broken tool. I stepped in. That is all. I stared at the floor. Why me? He dried his hands. Took a moment. Then, because I know what it feels like to be forgotten. His words hit something buried deep. Why the wedding dress? I asked suddenly, voice sharp with panic. I had found it in the chest weeks ago. Lace sleeves. My name stitched inside. He looked stunned. Then, slowly, he said, I hoped, one day, you might want to wear it. Not for me. For yourself. Because you chose it. My throat closed. I ran to the barn, breath ragged, heart unraveling. I sat in the hay, sobbing into my skirt. It was too much. The kindness. The patience. The terrifying possibility that he meant it. Later that night, I found a bowl of stew left at the door, still warm. Nothing more. The next morning, I stood in the doorway as he saddled the mule. I read your favorite psalm, I said, voice shaking. The one about the valley of the shadow. He looked over. I am not afraid anymore, I said, barely a whisper. He smiled. Not big. Just enough to say, I see you. That was the first day I believed I might belong. Not because he said so. Because I chose to. Summer rolled in slow, like honey on a hot skillet. The days grew longer, and the silence between us changed. Not colder. Not warmer. Just thicker, like something unsaid hovered in the air. Wyatt and I shared most meals now. Still on opposite ends of the table, but not as strangers. More like two trees growing from the same root, not yet touching, but aware of each other's presence. He would fix things around the house without a word. Hinges, broken lanterns, fence rails. And I would bake cornbread, sew curtains, tidy the bookshelf he never touched until I came. One day, I found an old photograph under the floorboard in the bedroom. A woman, stern-eyed but beautiful, holding a boy with familiar brown eyes. I stared at it a long time before I asked. Your mother? He nodded. She read to me every night. Taught me how to pray. Did she know you joined the war? She made me promise not to kill unless I had to. I broke that promise. His voice cracked, just a little. I said nothing. Just listened. That afternoon, I planted rosebushes by the porch. Wyatt watched from the barn, silent. I never had anything that lasted, I told him. But flowers, they come back every spring. He said, so do people, Clara. Sometimes I wanted to ask him what he saw when he looked at me. A child? A ghost? A girl broken too early to be whole again? But I could never bring myself to ask. Instead, I found small ways to reach toward him. A warm biscuit wrapped in cloth. A stitched hem on his coat. A psalm left open on his chair. He never said much, but sometimes, I caught him watching me. Not like a man who owned something. Like a man who cherished what he could never touch. Then came the day I found the box. It was hidden beneath a loose floorboard near the hearth. A wedding dress. White lace, hand-stitched, yellowing with age. My name embroidered on the collar, Clara Mae Holloway. I froze. My hands trembled as I lifted it. The bodice was small, like it had been made for me before I arrived. I felt sick. Was this always the plan? Buy the girl. Dress her in white. Wait for her to forget the price. I left it on the table and sat outside until night fell. When Wyatt returned, he saw the dress. And he saw my face. I made that with the help of Miss Edna, he said quietly. Months ago. Why? I demanded. I thought, if you ever chose to stay. To belong. You do not get to dress me up in a choice you made for me. I did not, he said, more softly than I expected. I hoped. That is all. I turned from him. I cannot be what you want. I do not want anything from you, he said. Except for you to feel safe. His voice broke on that word. Safe. I hated that it made me cry. The next morning, he left for town without a word. I spent the day cleaning, baking, mending, trying to feel something other than confusion. That evening, he returned with something wrapped in brown paper. He handed it to me like it might bite. I opened it. A book. Leaves of Grass, by Walt Whitman. I saw you eyeing it at the store last week, he said. I did not ask for it. You do not have to ask, Clara. I looked at him then, really looked. And I saw not a man trying to win me, but a man trying to make space for me. Space to heal. To choose. To stay, or not. That night, I read aloud. My voice no longer trembled. I read until the fire died down, and then I said, Wyatt? Yes? I want to believe you. His eyes met mine, steady. Then I will wait, he said. As long as it takes. Do you believe people can change for the better, no matter their past? Tell me below. The first time I touched his hand, it was not planned. We were fixing the chicken coop. A storm had blown half the roof off the night before. Rain had soaked through my dress, and mud clung to my boots. I climbed the ladder to hammer the loose board, but my hand slipped. The nail sliced through the skin, fast and deep. I did not cry out. Old habits. I just stared at the blood pooling in my palm. Then Wyatt was there, gentle, quiet, steady. He wrapped a cloth around my hand and pressed it tight. His fingers brushed mine. I froze. Does it hurt? He asked, his voice low. No more than most things, I whispered. He looked at me then, eyes filled with something I had never been given, tenderness without expectation. Later, he sat me on the porch and cleaned the wound with warm water and silence. I watched him, memorizing the lines on his face. How he furrowed his brow when he was focused. How his hands, though rough, held me like I was made of spun glass. You ever been looked after? He asked. I shook my head. Not like this. He did not smile. He just said, well. Then we start today. Something cracked inside me. Not pain. Not fear. Just, opening. That night, I left the loft and sat at the kitchen table while he read. Psalms again. His voice steady as the wind outside. When he finished, I asked, do you ever feel like you were made for sorrow? He looked surprised. Then he said, I used to. Until I realized sorrow does not get the final say. We sat in silence after that. But it was not empty. It was full of things we both understood but had no names for. In the weeks that followed, I started humming again. Not hymns this time, but small tunes I made up while washing or sewing. Wyatt never commented, but once I caught him tapping along on the porch rail. I began leaving fresh bread on the neighbors' porches. Small kindnesses, quiet offerings. For the first time, I wanted to give without being asked. One morning, he brought in a basket of apples from the east tree. For your pie, he said. You remembered, I said. I remember everything you say, he replied. That afternoon, I baked 2 pies, one for supper, one for the road. He raised an eyebrow. Where you going? I thought I might visit Miss Edna. Ask if she needs help with the schoolbooks. He smiled then. You are becoming someone new. No, I said. I am becoming who I was always meant to be. The next evening, I found a carved wooden box on my pillow. Inside was a small silver locket. Empty. For the day you feel ready to fill it, read the note beneath. I held it against my chest, eyes burning. I was not ready to say I loved him. Not yet. But I was no longer afraid of the day I might. The day Wyatt's brother rode in, the sky went dark in a hurry. Storm clouds gathered on the horizon like a warning. I felt it before I saw him, something ugly stirring the wind. His name was Clay. Same eyes as Wyatt, but no kindness in them. He rode hard, smelled of tobacco and regret, and looked at me like I was something to measure and weigh. "Well, ain't this a surprise," he said, dismounting. "Little brother bought himself a house girl." Wyatt stood still, arms crossed. "She is not yours to speak on." Clay smirked. "Everything in this world has a price. Ain't that what you taught me?" They argued low that night, behind the barn. I could not hear every word, but I caught pieces. "She is not like the others. You always were soft. Ain't no shame in taking what's already paid for." I did not sleep. I sat on the floor with my back to the door, a knife tucked into my lap. It was not the first time I had feared a man in the night. I remembered another night. Long before Wyatt. Long before any sense of safety. I was 13. My father's drinking buddy had stayed late. My mother had gone to bed. I was cleaning the table when he grabbed my wrist. "You are growing up, girl," he said, voice thick with whiskey. "Bet you do not even know what you're worth." I fought. Kicked a chair over, broke a plate. My father slapped me hard for making a scene. Told me to be grateful for attention. I learned then, silence was safer than truth. But now I was not that girl. And I would not be silent again. The next morning, Clay was gone from the barn but not the land. I found him near the well, drunk and loud. He grabbed my arm as I passed. "You act high and mighty, but we both know what you are," he hissed. $30 buys more than just pretty hands." Before I could answer, Wyatt was there, gun drawn, eyes wild. "Let her go." Clay let his hands fall, but his grin stayed. "I see. You fancy her. That why you never touched her? Waiting for her to ask nicely?" Wyatt struck him. Once. Hard. Clay stumbled but laughed, blood on his teeth. "This ain't over," he said, wiping his mouth. But it was. Because that night, I packed my things. Not because of Clay. Because of me. Because the fear had come back, and I hated how easily it returned. Because I did not want to be the reason Wyatt lost everything, not his land, not his name, not his peace. I left a note. "You gave me safety. I do not deserve it. I do not know how to stay. I am sorry." I slipped out before dawn, boots crunching on frostbitten grass. I did not look back. Not until the wind carried his voice from far behind, calling my name like a prayer swallowed by the mountains. The road away from Wyatt's ranch was colder than I remembered. Trees seemed taller. Shadows deeper. The land looked less like freedom and more like exile. I walked for hours before catching a ride with a trader headed north. He offered bread, not questions. I was grateful for the quiet. By nightfall, we reached a mining town built on soot and sorrow. Smoke hung heavy, and the streets stank of spilled ale and wet boots. I asked the trader to drop me near the livery. He tipped his hat and said, "God help you, girl." I found a spot in the hayloft and curled up with my satchel. Inside it, Wyatt's note: "You are not a burden. You are not a debt. You are a girl worth saving." I read it once, then tucked it deep in my bag. I could not think about him. Not yet. Instead, I cleaned stables in exchange for food. Carried water to the boarding house. Worked in silence, eyes down, trying to forget. But forgetting is a liar. The saloon across the street opened its doors every night, spilling out drunks and danger. The women there wore paint on their cheeks and fake smiles. One of them, Lila, noticed me hauling firewood and said, "You ain't cut out for this place, sweetheart." "I do not have a place," I said. She looked me over. "That man you ran from, did he hurt you?" "No," I said. "That is the problem." She blinked. "Then go back." "I cannot." "Why not?" "Because I do not know how to be loved." Lila just shook her head. "You will learn, or you will break." A few days later, the saloon owner offered me work. Said I could have a room upstairs, 3 meals a day, and a cut of the coin. All I had to do was smile. I almost said yes. But that night, I remembered Wyatt's face. The way he looked at me when I read Psalms. The way he held my hand when it bled. The way he never reached for what I did not offer. I could not trade that kind of safety for a bed behind a brothel curtain. So I ran again. Only this time, I had nowhere to go. I sat behind the church, knees pulled to my chest, praying into the dirt. "Lord, if I still belong to you, show me. Because I am lost." No voice answered. Just wind. Cold and bitter. But I stayed there until morning. That next day, a wagon pulled in from the east. An old man hauling hay and crates of apples. He spotted me and said, "You Wyatt Walker's girl?" My breath caught. "Why?" "Saw him last week. Been riding from town to town, asking if anyone seen a girl with a ribbon in her hair and fire in her eyes. Said he would give up every acre he owns to get her home." My knees buckled. He gave up his land? For a girl he never touched, the man said. Some folks say he is a fool. He is not, I whispered. He is the only man who ever meant it. The old man offered me a ride. I stared down the road. And for the first time in weeks, I knew where I belonged. The ride back was long, dusty, and full of questions I was not sure I could answer. I sat beside the old man in silence, clutching my satchel like it held something more than bread and ribbon and memories. I kept hearing that man's words, he would give up every acre he owns to get her home. Wyatt had already paid my father $30. He owed me nothing more. And yet, he searched. Not for what was his, but for who had left. When the wagon reached the edge of familiar land, I asked the driver to stop. "I need to walk the last mile." He nodded, understanding more than I said. I stepped down and began across the prairie. Wind carried the scent of pine and smoke. I could see the roofline of the house, the glint of the well pump. But I kept walking slow, like I needed time to gather the pieces of myself before crossing that threshold. Near the front gate, I stopped. A ribbon, my ribbon, was tied around the fence post. It fluttered in the wind like a signal fire. I untied it with trembling fingers. Wyatt had left a note beneath it, pinned with a nail. "Still hoping you come back. Still praying." I pressed the paper to my lips and cried. Not because I was afraid. Because I was no longer afraid. Inside the house, it smelled like home. Flour, tobacco, and pine. The chair I had fixed was still near the stove. The locket he gave me sat unopened on the table. He was not there. I waited 3 days. Fed the hens. Repaired a loose shutter. Read aloud each night into the quiet. On the 4th morning, I heard hooves. Wyatt rode in with dust on his coat and hollowness in his eyes. He looked at me like I was a ghost. "You came back," he said, like it hurt to hope. "I was always coming back," I said. He climbed down, eyes wet. I took his hand. "I do not want to run anymore." He swallowed hard. "You do not have to." We stood there in the golden morning light, hands joined. Something had changed. Not just in him. In me. I had spent so long believing love had to be earned, or feared. But Wyatt taught me something radical. That real love waits. That it does not reach unless invited. That sometimes the ones who stay silent are the ones who carry you home. The days that followed felt like waking up after a long illness. I moved through the house different now, not like a guest, but like someone coming home after a long war. I hung my shawl on the same hook each night. I baked bread without asking. I sang, softly, while sweeping the floor. And Wyatt, he did not ask questions. He just stayed close, like a lantern on the porch when the wind picks up. One afternoon, I found a child sitting near the chicken coop, barefoot, tear-streaked, no more than 8. "Name's Rosie," she whispered. "Mama's sick. Sent me here. Said Miss Clara would know what to do." I blinked. Miss Clara. She knew my name. I wrapped Rosie in a quilt, gave her stew, and sent Wyatt to fetch her mother. Miss Edna arrived by nightfall with a borrowed mule and a worried brow. "She walked 5 miles just to find you," she said. I tucked Rosie into the loft and sat beside her until she slept. Wyatt leaned against the doorframe and whispered, "You are someone's safe place now." That night, I stared at my reflection in the washbasin. My hair was longer. My eyes softer. My shoulders straighter. I was no longer a girl waiting to be loved. I was a woman learning to give it. Miss Edna returned the next day with fresh bread and news. "Folks are talking," she said. "Say you came back changed." "Changed how?" "Like someone who knows her name now." She offered me a position, teaching letters to the local children. "I am no schoolmarm," I said. "You do not have to be. You just have to care." That night, Wyatt placed the silver locket back into my hands. "Still empty," he said gently. "Still waiting." I opened it. Inside, I placed a curl of my hair and a folded strip of paper. Psalm 34 verse 18, "The Lord is close to the broken-hearted." I want to remember, I told him, not just the pain, but what came after. He did not kiss me. Not yet. But he took my hand and said, "Then let this be your beginning." The classroom was just the back room of Miss Edna's chapel, with one crooked table, 3 benches, and a chalkboard Wyatt built from scrap wood. But to me, and to the children, it was a kingdom. Each morning, I rang the bell myself. Children came in with dirty hands, tangled hair, and eyes hungry for stories. I taught them letters, numbers, and psalms. We sang together, off-key but full-hearted. Rosie never left my side. She followed me like a shadow, her hand always reaching for mine. "You smell like bread," she told me once. "And kindness." One morning, I caught my reflection in the schoolhouse window. I saw a woman, not a ghost. A woman with purpose in her stride and steadiness in her voice. I almost did not recognize her. And yet, she was more me than I had ever known. Back home, Wyatt watched it all unfold. He stood in the doorway most nights, listening to me hum while making supper, watching me sort through children's papers and pen notes in careful script. "You look lighter," he said once, as we shelled peas together. "Because I am no longer carrying shame that was never mine to hold." He nodded, quiet. But not everyone celebrated my change. Word spread about the schoolhouse, and about me. One Sunday, after church, a woman stopped me outside and said, "Teaching children? With your history?" I froze. Wyatt stepped beside me. Her history is what makes her the perfect teacher. I felt his hand touch the small of my back, firm, not possessive. Just enough to say, "I am here." Later that day, I found a bouquet of wildflowers on the porch. No note. But I knew who left them. Wyatt never had much use for fancy words. But his actions, they wrote volumes. That night, as the stars spilled over the prairie sky, I stood in the doorway and said, I want to stay. Not because I owe you. Because I choose to. He turned, slowly. I have loved you, he said, from the moment you looked at me like I was not dangerous. I have loved you, I replied, since you looked at me like I was not broken. Then, finally, he kissed me. Soft. Certain. Sacred. Not as a rescuer. But as a partner. As my equal. Have you ever found family in a place you never expected? I would love to hear your story in the comments. Spring melted into summer, and with it came a quiet peace I had never known. The house felt full, of warmth, of purpose, of life. My schoolroom grew with each week. Rosie's mama got stronger, and more children came through the chapel doors with chalk on their fingers and stories on their lips. But peace in the Wild West never lasted forever. Clay returned. He rode in like a storm, meaner, leaner, drunker than before. His horse was spooked, his eyes bloodshot. I was at the well when I saw him. Well, he sneered. The girl stayed after all. Wyatt stepped out from the barn, gun on his hip, calm as ever. I asked you not to come back. Clay spat. I heard you gave up land for her. Makes you dumber than I thought. I stepped between them. You do not scare me, I said. Clay grinned. You should be scared, sweetheart. Men like Wyatt? They always turn in the end. They get tired of saving strays. I stared him down. He never wanted to save me. He wanted to give me a place to save myself. Clay laughed. That so? Wyatt moved beside me, voice like thunder. Leave. Clay reached for his belt. Too slow. Wyatt already had his gun drawn. One warning shot into the dirt. Clay's smile vanished. He looked at me, then back at Wyatt, and saw something neither of us had before. We were no longer two people needing protection. We were a family that protected each other. He mounted up, spat in the dust, and rode away without another word. As his shadow disappeared into the hills, I felt something inside me release. Not fear. But the last strand of who I used to be. I turned to Wyatt. That was the last ghost, I said. He nodded. And he will not be back. Later that evening, we walked the fence line, fingers brushing. What will we call the school now? He asked. I smiled. Grace's school. For second chances. He kissed my hand. You are the bravest woman I know. I shook my head. No. Just one who finally stopped running. And for the first time, the horizon did not look like escape. It looked like home. Years passed like petals falling slow, quiet, steady, and soft with meaning. The house never grew grand, but it grew full. Laughter echoed through the kitchen. Children's drawings lined the hallway. Every corner held something alive, books, song, memory. I still rose before dawn. Still lit the fire, swept the porch, kneaded the bread. But it was no longer penance. It was ritual. A life built, not escaped. The schoolhouse grew too. We added more benches, a proper bell, even a map of the territories. Rosie became my little helper, then my assistant, and soon, my daughter in everything but name. She started calling Wyatt Pa one fall afternoon, without fanfare. He just nodded, eyes glassy, and kept brushing the mule. We never did speak much of the past. Not the part where I was sold. Not the part where I ran. We did not need to. It showed in how he touched my hand during storms. In how I placed my locket on the mantel, open, psalm verse still inside. One bitter winter, word came that my parents had died, poor, drunk, alone. No one claimed their land. No one claimed their names. I stood in silence when I heard. "I forgive them," I whispered. Not because they earned it, but because I did not need to carry their sins anymore. Wyatt did not speak. He only stepped behind me, wrapped his arms around my waist, and let me cry into his shirt. Every spring, I planted rosebushes. One for each year I had survived. Some years, I added 2. One afternoon, Miss Edna came by to visit. Her hair had gone white, but her voice still held that snap of wisdom. "You built something from ashes," she said. "No," I told her. "I found the spark. Wyatt was just the wind." She smiled. "You think it is wind that makes the fire burn? Maybe it was both. Maybe love is not about rescue. Maybe it is about quiet space and steady hands and a name spoken like a prayer." One evening, I stood outside our home, Rosie's laughter inside, Wyatt's boots thudding on the floorboards. I looked at the hills, golden in the fading light, and whispered, "I am not what they did to me." And for the first time in my life, I believed it. In the end, it was not the money that changed her life. Not the land. Not the house. It was the quiet love of a man who never took what was not offered. The fierce resolve of a girl who refused to stay broken. And the soft, steady rise of grace, grace that did not need permission, or a pedigree, or a perfect past. Clara Grace Holloway began as someone discarded, and became someone desired. Not for what she could give, or earn, but for who she was when finally given space to be. Wyatt never saved her, not in the storybook way. He simply waited. Listened. Protected. And gave her back to herself, piece by fragile piece. Together, they did not erase the past. They built over it. A home. A school. A family. And when the town spoke her name, it was not in shame. It was in reverence. Because she stood for every girl who was once handed over like a possession. And chose, instead, to become a person. To any woman listening, anyone who has ever been discarded, overlooked, or told she is too broken to bloom, I want you to remember. You are not what they did to you. You are what you choose to build from it. Even in the Wild West, where laws were loose and hearts were hardened, love still found its way. Not through force, but through gentleness. And a hand that never closed too tight. If Clara's journey moved you, let me know, what part of her story touched your heart the most? Share it in the comments below. And if you have ever been redeemed by unexpected love, I would be honored to hear your story too. Because somewhere out there, another woman is listening, and needs to know she is not alone.